You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WYPC.
WCYTV.
Here on the Daily Signal.
Good evening. Welcome to the Tony Kinnett Cast, where we're going to get right into that quick news roundup because you guessed it's 2025. There's a lot of news that we have to dig into. First and foremost, the Libs are learning a very, very important lesson. And for that matter, it's a lesson they should have been learning over the last month and really the last couple of years, but it started to sink in finally in the last day. And that is, be careful how much power you abdicate to the executive branch of government. Be careful as a legislative branch how much power, because you're lazy, because you don't want to do your job, because you just want to shove it on out there without being responsible or accountable for it, you give to the executive branch. Libs have spent years giving power to Obama, giving power to President Biden, and saying, yeah, you can cut off funding for a state anytime you want. If they're not following your interpretation of federal laws about the southern border, for instance, then Biden, you can just cut off funding to Texas. And that was the way it was seen as the law of the land. And now we get to Donald Trump's second administration, who burst in like the Kool-Aid man with a vengeance and set out to correct a lot of things through the exact same means as President Obama's second term, or really beginning in the first term after 2010, after he lost seriously in the midterms. And then throughout all of Joe Biden's pen-wielding executive order administration, now Trump has come in to say boys are boys, girls are girls. They don't play sports together. They don't change in the locker room together. That's gross and you're weird if you believe that's okay. And Maine, with their governor who looks like Austin Powers and Ellen DeGeneres had some type of illicit love child, has clinged to this very desperate idea that they're going to stand in the breach and they're going to resist. And Donald Trump clocked her in the face in person today. It's one of the most beautiful exchanges I have seen where the left realizes in real time, we may have made a mistake.
The NCAA has complied immediately, by the way. That's good. But I understand Maine. Is Maine here, the governor of Maine?
Yeah, I'm here.
Are you not going to comply with it?
I'm complying with state and federal laws.
We are the federal law. Well, you better do it. You better do it because you're not going to get any federal funding at all if you don't. And by the way, your population, even though it's somewhat liberal, although I did very well there, your population doesn't want men playing in women's sports. So you better comply because otherwise you're not getting any federal funding.
See you in court.
Every state, good. I'll see you in court. I look forward to that. That should be a real easy one. And enjoy your life after governor because I don't think you'll be in elected politics.
Boom! First of all, that's how an executive should act when that is the stake at play. When you have someone who's going to, well, no, we're not going to follow the law, but you still need to give us money. The president of the United States has every authority to say, okay, well then fine. If you are not going to follow my interpretation of executive policy, then you don't need any executive money. And by the way, there were individuals when Greg Abbott told Joe Biden, we're not going to follow your garbage interpretation of immigration law because this is an assault on the sovereignty of Texas and keeping its own citizens safe. Then Biden said, fine, then we'll pull federal funding. And Abbott and a lot of the rest of the country said, okay, now what? And then it was Biden's administration that filed the lawsuit. So Janet Mills, who again looks very much like every single suburban liberal wine-drunk mom who is very obsessed with LGBTQ for some reason, has decided to double down. And this is what the Libs are going to do instead of any genuine strategy. And it really isn't going to pan out for them because the judge decisions, the federal judicials are continuing to rule out a series of back and forth style rulings in which on Tuesday, you'll have judges ruling basically in favor of parts of the Trump administration. Wednesday, other judges will claw that back. And this is going to eventually end up in the Supreme Court of the United States. Today, U.S. District Judge Carl Nichols reversed his previous ruling, and now Trump has the authority to fire thousands of USAID staffers. Remember, a couple of days ago, Trump signed an executive order reminding the country, hey, all of these executive federal agencies work for the office of the president. That's just objectively true. That's true when Biden's in office. That's true when Obama's in office. That's true when Bush was in office. Executive agency officials, all the way down from the lowest janitor and office worker up to the cabinet secretary, serve at the pleasure of the President of the United States of America. If you don't like that, then don't give those agencies so much power. Too bad. And by the way, do I want those agencies to have so much power? No, absolutely not. As a former teacher and school administrator, I can tell you up front that state administrations and federal administrations over education have been royally goofing up education for, in Indiana's case, for its Department of Education, a century. And at the Department of Education level, since Carter wiped his pen across the page. Federal agencies are a disaster, but you gave the power to these agencies. So now you're trying to claw back this power. It's too late. The Democrats don't have a majority in the House. They don't have a majority in the Senate. They certainly don't have a majority on the Supreme Court. They don't really have the necessary number of federal judges to come in and start ruling, these national injunctions that freeze everything into place. Because what you're starting to see are other federal judges waltz through and knock those down. So right now it's a game of tetherball between different federal judicials and the district courts around the country, because the country was never meant to operate this way. There's no procedure in place for District Court 1 throwing it down with District Court 3 and DC going at it with Texas and LA going at it with Iowa. It's not going to last. It's not going to last, and it will end up in front of the Supreme Court. Now, that's not all Trump is up to at the moment. Trump has also just rescinded the temporary protected status that Biden allotted for about 500,000 Haitian migrants, which had allowed 500,000 of these Haitian migrants to skip the visa process with no vetting whatsoever to have a visa in this country, which has resulted in murders, sex crimes, etc., on and on and on. This, of course, is something that a lot of Americans approve of. The leftist media is just losing their ever-loving marbles over it, though. Trump's going to expel mamas and grandmamas and children. Oh, it's just so... Oh. Well, I mean, it's a dog-eat-dog world, at least in the anarchist Republic of Haiti. So I don't know what to say. Maybe vet people next time before you just bring them en masse. By the way, Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem, which is an underrated member of the Trump administration in this maverick group he has assembled. This is from yesterday, Noem talking about some of the illegal immigration enforcement results so far.
I was just going through some of the folks that we've pulled off the streets to deport out of this country because of President Trump's focus on making America safe again. Here we have a guy named Gonzalez, who's been convicted of sodomy of children less than 13 years of age. He has been sentenced to prison, but he is out of our country now, thanks to President Trump. Another guy here who is arrested and has been removed, but he was convicted for possession of distributing child porn. So this guy was distributing that throughout the country, illegal alien, gone from our country now.
She goes on and just says receipt after receipt after receipt after receipt. This is going to cripple the Democrats in the midterms. Because if Republicans actually, for the first time ever, like for the first time in history, actually maintain a database of receipts, these are the individuals that were deported and the crimes they were arrested for. This is why they're gone. And also, here's a series of things that Doge is cutting and how much it cost. Here is a list of things Trump is doing and the policies he's accomplished. If they keep a database and then just throw that database like a science textbook at the voters, then you're going to see a very, very uphill battle for the media to come out and suggest something different. And it's not going to get any easier for them because with Howard Lutnick sworn in now as the Secretary of Commerce and Kash Patel busting in like Rocky Balboa to be the new director of the FBI, the Epstein list and the Sean Diddy Combs lists and associates are expected to be released. And for those who are concerned, everyone's constantly refreshing social media waiting to see if the Epstein list and the files have been released. Attorney General Pam Bondi came out of the woodwork yesterday to reassure the public we are in the process of digging through. There are a lot of documents. They are going to be released, So we now have assurances from the Attorney General. Kash Patel is in. They are in the process of getting those documents ready for release. And there are a lot of nervous people who are not going to be getting a lot of sleep this evening. We'll see the radio crew after the commercial break. It is the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal. Okay. All right, that takes us over to some of the stuff from last night. And I'm so sorry to share that Canada did beat the United States 3-2 in overtime. It was a brutal game. The whole way through, it was a very well-played game. Matthew Tkachuk and two other of our American players were out. The hardest part for me watching the game actually was seeing Matt Tkachuk repeatedly ask the coach if he could go in, despite being too injured to play. He said, well, I can force my way through it. Very common in every single hockey team around the globe. But as far as this particular game is concerned, there were a lot of golden opportunities in overtime that were missed by the American team, which I hate to see. Going up against Canada in overtime in hockey is like climbing Everest in gym clothes. It's a Herculean effort at best. So now, in recent weeks, the United States has won, Canada has won a game, and I am looking very much towards the Vancouver Winter Olympics. So this is going to be This is going to be one for the books. I'm very, very excited to see what is coming. Excuse me, not in Vancouver. I was thinking of an earlier Winter Olympics. Milano Cortina in 2026. So that Winter Olympics is coming up. It's going to be a good one. Now, that didn't stop people from saying really cringy and awkward things. Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, who announced he would be resigning as the head of the Liberal Party because he's terrible at his job, decided to tweet out, quote, "You can't take our country and you can't take our game," which is pretty tough talk from someone who can't even organize their own hockey league in the country without serious problems. Also tough talk for someone without nukes. So all this is necessarily done is show that the United States needs to take Canada as a non-voting territory instead of giving it statehood. So then Jasmine Crockett, the crackhead of Congress, opened her mouth and suggested that in all international events right now that she's actually rooting for Canada and Mexico.
Been the one to call it out. The fact that I'm rooting for Canada and I'm rooting for Mexico a lot is really wild, but they are really the ones that are speaking truth to power right now. They can see what it is, and they were like, we are not messing with this crazy regime from Mar-a-Lago, and basically calling them thugs. And
basically they just stood up for the cartels, and I really agree with that. So when you think about the cartels and what they do for the people, then when you think about it, I'm really rooting for Canada, which I'm told is close to the country. I've never seen it myself, but it's nearby. Every time Jasmine Crockett speaks, I want to drive into the nearest telephone pole, and if that doesn't finish me off, I want to drag through the broken glass that the car has created upon collision. You're in the United States Congress. Good, sweet Mike. So, a little bit later, I will bring up some of the other wise words from Democrats. You know what? No, we'll do it now. Here's James Carville, brilliant Democrat strategist and guy who looks like a very sad, bald, homeless man, who thinks that all Indian people are the same.
And J.D. Vance, Don Jr., Kash Patel was Tucker's business partner. I'm just telling you what's out there, okay? And Tucker.
Oh, it's just out there. You know, Kash Patel and Vivek Ramaswamy and J.D. Vance's wife, they're all the same. They're all Indians, right? I mean, come on. Well, solid PR there, Democrats. All right, we'll be back in a second. We're going to talk a little bit about the situation in Maine. It's getting heated with State Rep Laurel Libby. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal.
This is the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Back to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated, first on 93 WIBC. We are joined by Maine State Representative Laurel Libby from Maine's 90th to talk a little bit about some of the controversy that's been going on regarding Maine schools not following certain executive orders, putting girls at risk. A lot to talk about. Representative Libby, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. It's my pleasure.
So give us a bit of an outline, those of us that aren't up in Maine, as to what's going on in the last couple of weeks regarding some of these scandals.
Absolutely. It's been kind of a whirlwind. Shortly after President Trump put out his executive order regarding boys and girls sports, the Maine Principals Association came out and said, we are not going to comply. We are going to continue to allow biological males to participate in girls' sports. We knew it was only a matter of time before we saw that occurring in Maine. And sure enough, this past week on Monday, a biological male won the pole vaulting state championship for the girls team here in Maine. And so it has obviously caused a bit of a stir and thankfully gotten the attention of President Trump, this non-compliance with that executive order.
So I just want to make sure that I have this right, at least at the moment. The difference between the Maine track and field, I was a track coach for a little while, but a long distance running guy. I never knew how anyone could begin to coach the pole vaults and the other, kind of the more niche sports in track and field was never one of mine. The difference between the males pole vaulting record and the women's pole vaulting record for Maine track and field, for men, it's 16 feet 7 inches. For women, it's 12 feet 0 inches. So the difference in averages that we could say from the exceptional athletes due to biological differences are consistent looking from Maine to other states as well. It's not a small difference. It's a fair size difference. And undercutting women's sports on its face. If we could put aside for a second, obviously the risk of guys changing in girls' locker rooms and in competitive contact sports, on its face, just putting young ladies in a situation where they're facing a heavy biological disadvantage and then rubbing it in their faces in state championships, that's a bit gross on its face, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. You talk about those biological differences, right? We've got, whether we're talking about increased musculature, heavier bone structure, there are so many biological advantages that males have. It's absolutely unfair and ludicrous to ask female athletes who've worked so hard. You talk about the technical aspects of pole vaulting. It's an incredibly difficult sport, but any sport where girls have worked so hard to achieve something and asking them to compete against a biological male with those advantages is ridiculous. It's absolutely not fair. And to see a male on the podium instead of the girl who belonged there is heartbreaking.
Especially given all of the work. So something, at least one of the only, I'm going to run out of ways to relate to this really quickly here, but one of the only similarities I know of between pole vaulting and when I was in college, played a little bit of club male volleyball, is how you have to train certain muscle groups in order to get that really fast reaction time and not lose any of the springiness of the tendons. And when we were looking at how guys would train for volleyball and girls would train for volleyball, it's very different because, like you said, the development of the muscular, as well as how you keep certain things limber, different hormones in guys and gals go to keeping certain things more fluid and keeping things from tearing. It's a very different thing. And it's not even a better or worse situation. It's apples and oranges. And for a principals association just to flout that because they want to be morally superior to themselves is such a classic principals association thing. I'm a former teacher and administrator, so I know this crew. Do you think that they knew there was going to be a national scandal following just flouting again, a federal executive order and new Department of Education policy so openly?
I don't know that they predicted that. We have had boys participating in girls' sports for a number of years now. There's another athlete who's been participating as he's a biological male. He participates in cross country, and he's been crushing girls times for a couple of years now. And so this isn't new. So I think the Maine Principals Association thought that everyone would just go along to get along and not speak up about how unfair this is to Maine girls. But we have a chance right now to make a difference and level the playing field, ensure that Maine girls have a fair chance to participate in their designated sport. And so it's time to make sure that Maine girls do have a level and fair playing field. And that's going to take federal action.
And one of the reasons that I find this so bizarre is that for the last couple of years, I remember in school board meetings and conversations with principals around the country, whenever I would provide legislative advice to a couple of different state legislatures, and even those on the left would say, well, hey, we don't necessarily believe in these policies morally. What we believe in is federal law. And we really just don't want a lawsuit. We're just trying to, follow the administration's guidance and procedures when they were defending keeping boys in biological girls' sports. But now that the administration has changed and that the rules are different, now I don't hear the same individuals who said, we're just following the law. They're not saying that anymore. All of a sudden, they're the moral crusaders ready to step up and defend something that's, as we talked about at the beginning, objectively abhorrent.
Yeah, and Maine is unique in that I don't think the administration ever said that here in Maine, because we've had a Democrat trifecta for the last 6 years, a Democrat governor, a Democrat majority in the House, and a Democrat majority in the Senate.
Right. I was talking about from the federal level.
Absolutely.
Because federal funding from the DOE is tied into their weird, bizarre interpretation of Title IX for a little while. And then the Biden administration tried to tie federal funding to like outing trans kids or something like that. That's what I was referring to.
Yeah, absolutely. And Maine's stance all along, regardless of what the federal government has said, has been we are going to allow boys to participate.
Oh, like an individual bulwark situation.
Exactly. Maine has been ahead of the curve, maybe.
Oh, yikes.
And so that's why I say it's going to take federal action, because with the current Democrat leadership that we have, we're not going to see a change. We're not going to see Maine girls protected without action from the Trump administration.
Now, I've talked to some parental rights groups over in the Northeast, especially in Maine, actually near Augusta. So I want to get a sense from you in the State House there. Is the momentum from parents still sizable? Because we started to see a bit of an ebbing of kind of the parents' rights movements leading into 2024 and 2025 following. Is there still a strong parental rights push up in Maine, or is it starting to wane a bit?
I think there is. And I think this is going to reinvigorate that. I have been hearing from folks across the state, parents, coaches, female athletes who have seen what's going on, and it's kind of reinvigorated them to speak up. And so there are more and more folks coming out saying, we don't think it's fair for biological males to be participating in girls' sports. And this is an issue, this is an issue that folks get. There's inherent fairness here.
It's kind of hard not to.
Absolutely.
If you really set yourself aside, it's one of those things where we sit down. So for example, like the school lunch funding issue is one of those things that when you actually sit down and you talk about it like reasonable individuals, you can get the both sides of it and just have the common sense of, well, our goal either way is to make sure that kids are fed. And the best way to do that, you can talk about the issue and what the best way is to do it. This is one of those that I also feel is such a common sense thing across most of the cultures that make up the primary demographics of the country. Like, yeah, this is the weirdest hill to die on for the left.
It absolutely is. Polling shows that 79% of Americans say boys don't belong in girls' sports.
Also, polling in the state championship shows that guy shouldn't have won. Yeah. Sorry, a little bit of a pun, perhaps.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, by winning the state championship, he displaced a biological female who has been working really, really hard for many years, whether we're talking about pole vaulting or any other sport. But, this girl You literally are running, vaulting, flipping yourself upside down over a pole, doing a really high skill maneuver. And now she doesn't get to have the podium as she should because a boy has taken her spot. It's remarkably unfair.
So we've talked about the blowback. We've talked about some things, to come in the expectation from some Trump actions. And I won't ask you to make any particular comment on that. What do you think regarding individuals who are outraged about this in Maine, in the New England area, maybe in the country as a whole, who are looking to get action of some sort over the finish line, right? This is a marathon situation. It's not a sprint. And I wasn't trying for a track and field metaphor there, but one just kind of popped out. How do you, as a representative, what kind of support do you need from those that aren't dealing with the yelling inside the State House every day?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I absolutely encourage folks to make their voices heard. And we certainly do have legislation coming before us here in the State House in Maine regarding boys and girls sports this coming session. And so I hope folks will speak up loudly in support of girls here in Maine. If folks do want to learn more, they can sign up for my emails at laurellibby.com. And we've got to work together. We've got to speak up together and make sure that Maine girls feel supported on this issue.
I think that you're absolutely right. Representative Laurel Libby, State Rep from Maine's 90th. Thanks for taking a moment to chat with us today so that hopefully we can keep guys who are placing like 5th in their own division from, again, waltzing over to the girls' division and taking away a victory from those who've worked for it. Thanks again.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
We'll be back in just a second. Don't go anywhere. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal.
Trump pardoned 23 pro-lifers who were convicted for actions including praying outside abortion clinics and encouraging women in unplanned pregnancies to choose life. Since 2021, the Biden-Harris administration's Justice Department brought charges under the FACE Act against at least 50 pro-life advocates, while failing to charge those who attacked pregnancy centers and churches. I spoke with these pro-life advocates to hear what prison was really like. Now, they have a message for President Trump. You won't want to miss it.
23 people were prosecuted. They should not have been prosecuted. This is a great honor to sign this.
It's the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Welcome back to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal with breaking news. The Associated Press suing 3 Trump administration officials over access to presidential events, citing First Amendment concerns. The Associated Press, of course, was temporarily blocked from an inner Oval Office kind of presidential interview, press gaggle situation. Writing about that over at the Daily Signal is our Jarrett Stepman. Thanks for joining us this evening. I know it's kind of quick to hop right in on a breaking news story, so give us a little bit of the overview. What's going on with AP?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Tony. I appreciate it. And this whole dust-up actually started over, if you all remember, the change to Gulf of America from the Gulf of Mexico over that. Well, AP, which is extremely powerful and influential actually in the media industry, it has the famous AP style guide, which is often used by many media outlets as the sort of gold standard. Well, AP decided that they were not going to change the name to Gulf of America. This prompted the Trump administration to essentially ban the AP from getting what I would call VIP access to the White House, the Oval Office, to access to Air Force One. Now, obviously, AP didn't like this, didn't take this very well. I actually wrote for the Daily Signal. I think this change has been a long time in coming for AP, which has moved away from the gold standard of objectivity to becoming a very partisan left-wing website where they've been willing to manipulate language. And I think that's why this case is particularly important, because they've been willing to manipulate language to advance left-wing goals. I think it's been very clear for a number of years. And the fact that they now believe that they should have unlimited access to the White House, that's somehow their First Amendment right, I think is a joke.
Well, you'll recall that after the initial, I say the initial, though it was really the entire administration, that through the major border crises of the Biden administration, the Associated Press, after prompting from the White House, after critiques from the press secretary's office, changed how they started covering illegal immigration overflow at the border. And so when it's for Biden, it's, oh, bend down, yes, how can we change what we write for you? But, the AP all of a sudden, name changes from the official U.S. government, oh, that's too far.
Yeah, and it really, honestly, it makes me angry because I know especially there's some conservatives who now are backing Associated Press, and to a certain extent, look, I believe in free press. That, there should be questions asked of the president. I actually think that Trump has been particularly open with the press, even including many media organizations that have been quite hostile to him. And Trump has been, frankly, given more access to the media than the previous president did, who barely showed up outside the White House. So I think it's really rich that AP is making this move right now, because this actually goes back to the Biden presidency, when there were a lot of journalists who lost access to the White House. The Biden administration stripped White House press passes from 440 journalists. I don't remember AP even covering that story or making any statement about the temples and pillars of democracy being violated. They said nothing. As other journalists were being removed from the White House. So I find it awfully rich now that they think of themselves as the pillar of democracy when other journalists were getting removed. I think it's ridiculous.
And it should be thought of as ridiculous because it's always a very gatekeeping enterprise journalism, where it's that those on the left have their outlets, and those are the very hallmark hollowed halls of journalism. And then on the outside of that, if it's someone in the center, it's someone in the right, if it's someone from another country's news source or whatever, then all of a sudden they stamp on the brakes and they say, well, that's not real news. And then they start throwing out barbs and arrows and everything they can in sheer complaint over not having complete ultimate access and control of the distribution of news and analysis. And with the Associated Press, I just don't care. It's not like they've been banned from reporting in the United States. They're just not given one of these select spots. Their readership has already been declining. Several outlets like the Kinnett newspapers, the USA Today network, they're no longer buying Associated Press newswires because they're too expensive. No one's reading them.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's been a sea change now in how the media exists. I mean, the legacy media outlets like Associated Press are losing their influence. And the fact is, look, they've acted as if they're a special kind of guild that's supposed to get special protections under the First Amendment. The First Amendment applies to everybody. Everybody has a First Amendment right. We can all be journalists. Anybody can be a journalist. It's not some special, something included in the Constitution. And I think that a lot of these legacy media outlets, as you said, they're used to having their gatekeeping role They don't like the fact that they now have a lot of competition with alternative media sources that are doing a lot better than they are these days. They have actually increasing audiences where people are listening to them who trust them. People don't trust AP like they once did. And, frankly, again, I don't really feel that much sympathy that they lost their VIP access at this moment. Why should the Trump administration continue to give them this access?
And it's also a real shoe on the other foot kind of moment. Yet it is also a lost opportunity, I would say, for some of these outlets, because you look at the Associated Press, you look at Washington Post, who were given upfront pushback from the consumer market that people were tired of news that was only ever slanted one way. Not that news never could be slanted, not that analysis or the bias is everywhere, but the AP, Washington Post, USA Today, CNN, etc., they had the opportunity to reach out across the aisle and maybe hire some of these independent journalists, teach them perhaps some of the tools of the trade, the tricks of how this business works. And they didn't do that. Instead, they shut them out. And now that there's no reason to keep the Associated Press in some magical VIP special access fast pass slot like a theme park, they're throwing a fit. And the pearl clutching is just wide. Oh, this is Trump's a fascist. Next, it's going to be burning newspapers in the street. What?
Yeah, it's interesting to see the entire legacy media environment turn into a blue sky, essentially, a glorified blue sky right before us. It's becoming a cloistered environment in which they've created their own echo chambers. They've even celebrated the crackdowns on speech in Europe, which I think is quite ridiculous. The celebrating of censorship. They're obviously fine with some people being censored, but how dare you cut off my special privileges and access? It's awfully rich. Nobody's going to cry for them. Yes, I mean, it is bad when the media goes downhill, but frankly, I actually think this is going to be a golden age of media. We're losing a lot of these gatekeepers that over time lost a lot of trust of the American people, learned absolutely nothing from this last election. In fact, they seem to be completely out to lunch, and they're getting their lunch eaten now by a lot of media outlets that are appealing to a lot of Americans that are actually, telling the truth about things and covering things fairly. They could learn a lot from that. They haven't. And this is the bed that they've made, and they're going to continue on it. Who knows how long?
You and I do a lot of analysis at the Daily Signal. We spend a lot of time poring over these various reports and the breaking news as it comes in. And I know that something we have in common is a lot of historical pattern recognition, something that you and I really like. I'm perplexed at best, disgusted at worst, or annoyed maybe because of all the eye rolling that I do when I see that these stories and then like reports from the Rolling Stone are these herald benchmark proofs as though Trump is the next Führer, the next emperor, the next leader of the Reich, whatever. And that is what the Democrats are choosing as their point of attack right now. Again, all the targets out there, the soft targets, the more armored targets the Trump administration has put out there, they are going all in for the 15th time on the Trump is a Nazi thing. So first question, get this one out of the way. Is there any evidence at all? I mean, objectively here, if we can take a moment, is there any objective evidence the dude's whipping out the fascism card?
No, I mean, if he was, why didn't that happen during his last term? I mean, I feel a lot of these people, they're frankly, they didn't learn the lesson of the boy who cries wolf, which is not to lie twice. Well, they've done it about seemingly 15,000 times at this point. Mm-hmm. People are tuning them out. If you just simply cry fascist, 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 Nazi, 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 people just, they tune that out. And over time, look, if there was a Nazi, if there was a fascist, how would they identify it when they call, little grandmas who have a Trump sign in the yard a Nazi and a fascist? To me, it's a lot of these people who don't have any kind of historical perspective, they simply yell out these words, Nazi, fascist, with little understanding. I mean, we had somebody, one of the venerated members of the legacy media say that the Nazis rose to power because of weaponized free speech, which is an absolute absurdity. I don't think that's what people think of when they think of the Third Reich. Think of, all that free speech they had. Wasn't that terrible? That led to the Holocaust.
Well, the reason they don't think of it is because that was nowhere in the cited history whatsoever. There's nothing that we can find. And that's such a recent event. We have audio interviews with individuals, video interviews with individuals about the rise of the fascist Third Reich in Germany, as well, by the way, as fascist Spain, as well as the other prominent Eastern European conflicts. None of the hallmarks of the rises of communism or fascism were free speech. But I digress, because there is one thing I thought it was funny, the way that you framed your statement there about crying wolf. I got in a bit of an argument this morning with someone from the LA Times over something very similar, that the left has spent the last 20 years calling anything and everything fascist, including milquetoast white bread Mitt Romney, the most moderate Republican that ever moderated. And that was a fascism thing. So now when, they actually, Trump trolls them by posting the fake Time magazine, long live the king picture. Now in a realistic world, that might actually be a moment when you could point and say, see, but they've already cried wolf for so long, the word has lost all meaning.
It's lost entirely. It's lost meaning. And now at this point, they're so easily baited, actually, I would say, into falling into the trap, because this has obviously become ineffective. We had an entire campaign season where Trump was called the man who was going to end democracy. He was called a fascist tyrant. And now through democracy, he's become president. I actually think this falls right into Trump's hands. He wants them to keep screaming fascist, Nazi over and over again, because it makes them totally ineffective. They're unable to actually address what his administration is doing. I think that his kind of multi-front attack on the administrative state has been highly successful. I think they basically lost any strategy as far as how to actually defeat Trump and actually push back at this point. So they've been reduced to just sputtering and muttering. I think this is actually Trump's, his ability in the media to actually goad a lot of his opponents into behaving ridiculously. So in the future, if he actually did something that was bad, nobody would believe it. Nobody would believe it at all.
This is where, from my pool of analysis, this is where I start to draw short. And I'm willing to admit, when I say I don't understand, I really genuinely mean I don't get it. Why is so I would pull from an example as a child when I was playing Pokemon Sapphire, and I would have an attack and I would use a water type against a fire type. The game will say that's not very effective. And then that is a mental trigger for you as the player to go, oh, I will try something different instead. To put this in an older context, anyone has done something arduous and annoying, like trying to get a sticker off of a product at a store, and you try something, it doesn't work. So then you try something different. You don't sit there and try the same thing over and over and over ad nauseum. I don't get it. Why are we still watching the left? And not just fringe groups or the loudest groups. You've actually got Ken and David running the DNC now doing this. Why are they trying this over and over again?
I think it's because they've had so many decades of institutional power in which they've gotten their way that they've become lazy. They've become ineffective.
Oh, not denial, but apathy?
Well, no, I think it's the fact that they're used to institutions coming to their aid and their benefit. They're used to being these gatekeepers. Now that they can't control things like they once did, they don't have another way around it. They don't have another strategy. They don't have another plan because they're unused to having another plan. They're used to being able to use these institutions essentially to shut down any debate or arguments. That's why I think that's what's happening in Europe right now, where you have J.D. Vance telling these Eurocrats how it is. They're not used to somebody just going right to their face and telling the truth. They're used to being able to censor other people. They're used to being able to control the narrative. They've lost control of that, and I don't think they have any answers for it.
I think that you're dead on. Not that I'm surprised. Jarrett Stepman over at the Daily Signal. Some of the best columns around. Thanks very much for helping us break down this AP stuff, as again, breaking as it is.
Thank you, Tony.
We'll be back in just a second. Don't go anywhere. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal. Mail time. Mail time. Mail time.
On the Tony Kinnett Cast.
All right, let's get into just a few questions that I think are well worth the time this evening. This first one's from Gary. Nothing else, just Gary. He says, knowing that you're not a legal scholar, thanks, Gary, I was hoping you could put some insight to the question. With the lawsuits that are coming in at the 11th hour on a Friday night to liberal judges, at what point does the circuit court, or the Supreme Court even, state, quote, enough is enough, end quote, and start slapping sanctions on these frivolous lawsuits designed to hamstring the president's legal authority? Great question. The answer is, you and I have no idea. That's it. I've talked to legal analysts like Sarah Perry over at the Heritage Foundation. I've talked to people over, as much as it hurts me on the inside, at Cato. talked to some state officials and judges. I actually got a chance to talk to somebody on the Nebraska Supreme Court about this. No one has any idea when SCOTUS is finally going to reach down, that Clarence Thomas is going to grab one of these cases and whip it back as fast as he can up to the top of the Supreme Court's pile of cases to solve. The Founding Fathers did not intend SCOTUS to be working in and out every day, case after case after case after case. And so to have a line like this when there is a time when SCOTUS should weigh in is kind of a novelty. And so what you're going to see, what you saw today actually, was the Supreme Court say they're not quite ready to rule on whether or not Trump can fire like the head of a government oversight individual that's kind of sort of related to the government, but not quite. It's kind of a difficult situation like most federal agency garbage is. They have allowed a judge to keep a temporary stay in place because he's only protected until I think the end of February. So it doesn't really matter. SCOTUS doesn't need to weigh in yet. That said, Amy Coney Barrett, Clarence Thomas, Alito, Justice John Roberts are itching to start ruling on some of these things, I believe, given the recent rhetoric in some of the other cases that they're working on does start to allude to presidential authority. But to be very transparent with you, the shortest answer is we really don't know. This next one is from TV_D. He says, why won't you talk about Trump's abuse of power and all of the cuts to the FAA and to schools and Medicaid and national parks? Well, because I have not yet seen any abuse of power from the Trump administration. Now, you don't like that I'm saying that because I'm a conservative. You don't like that I'm saying that because it's not what you want me to say. And it's also not what people are getting up on MSNBC and CNN are saying. Right now, everyone who hates Trump is saying this is the worst thing ever. We've never seen anything like this. Constitutional crisis. And wee woo, get the ambulance out. Oh, it's the worst thing ever. No, it's not. This is the exact same stuff that Joe Biden and Obama were doing for the last decade and a half. And so when you look at the insanity, the rote insanity that is consistently coming out of executive orders and those who respond to them, this is the bed that you have made for yourself. Now, as far as like funding cuts, Trump hadn't been cutting all that much funding. Now, he has recommended certain parts of federal allocation to spending programs, again, like transgender comic books to Peru, be frozen, and Social Security fraud and things be frozen temporarily. But so far, he hasn't been cutting Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security and cutting everyone's tax breaks and IRS, and all the public schools are destitute and little Timmy's not going to learn how to read. Honestly, the federal government getting out of education would probably result in Timmy learning how to read. But as far as I have been obscuring Trump or something because I'm secretly being funded by the White House. No. Believe me, I would not say, well, I wouldn't say yes to USAID funding because that's really gross and weird. I certainly would not turn down a large-ass, amazing, super-duper sponsorship from Elon Musk. But that would come with the contingent that I let you guys know who does the funding. That's why we have this little sponsor Chiron that flies down on the bottom of the screen. Those things all said, just kind of reporting what's going on. And that's why I usually say via the New York Post or via this report, or I play the video of this individual so that I'm not just saying, well, I think, that this is the fact. If I tell you my opinion, it usually is framed with, hey, this is my opinion. See that? See what I did there? Kind of nice. Thanks for tuning in. The last question for today, and then we might do just a little bit of bonus tonus, just because I didn't get to play Marco Rubio putting both the establishment right and the populist right together, like in their place regarding the Russia and Ukraine peace talks debate. And we absolutely need to play that video because I love Vice President Vance, not only because he's one of the best looking vice presidents that we've ever had, no bias, but at least as far as Rubio is concerned, some level-headed stuff. So we'll get to that. Last question is, why are the left continually beating their head on, and this was written in a different way, but the way that was written was not really on-air appropriate. Why is the left clinging so desperately to the LGBTQ plus pseudoscience stuff right now? And the answer is that's all they have. So the left, whenever they expand into another cultural position, they have to tape everything together because that's the left's idea of building a coalition. There is another oppressed group that we have found somewhere, and so we're the party of the oppressed. Well, the problem is that creates an oppression pyramid where someone has to be more oppressed than the other. That's why the pride flag went through puberty 5 times in the last 10 years. And so you have this kind of oppression Olympics that's constant. Because there is that oppression Olympics, which the DNC has to abide by, well, this means that you can truly never be free of any of the groups that are a part of the left. So as soon as the transgender furry guy in a puppy mask and a diaper and whatever comes out and says, wait a minute, I thought you were for us, the left has to bring them in. Otherwise, they're accused of the very thing that they're preaching about. So the LGBTQ plus stuff, they've sunk millions and millions of dollars into that campaign. Up to and including having grown men in lingerie go to libraries and put kindergartners on their bare lap to read books to them. So when you start talking about rolling that stuff back, someone has to apologize. Someone has to say, you know what? Yeah, maybe that was patently insane. And the left has about as much humility as it does common sense. So this is going to be a long road. And I refer to the Washington Post article in which they wrote, Trump says there are 2 sexes. Experts and science say it's not binary. Does the science say that? No. Are those real experts saying that? No. And that's where we are. We'll see the radio team on Monday. We'll stick around for some bonus tonus on the live stream. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated, first on 93 WIBC. All right, team. Let's do just a bit of bonus tonus before we go away for the weekend and enjoy some well-deserved rest. There was one thing, just one thing, that I wanted to touch on that I didn't get to in the quick news roundup, and this would be Secretary of State Marco Rubio. So there's been a lot of chaos, you may have noticed, between the Trump administration's varied ways of describing Ukraine and its President Volodymyr Zelensky and Russia and its leader Vladimir Putin. And you may notice that Donald Trump has gone out in front of the world and said some rather wild things. I know. Donald Trump say big hyperbolic thing? No. I, for one, am shocked, shaken, shooken, not stirred. I can't believe it. And then the world had mean things to say. How dare you? And some of it was, again, kind of more of an eyebrow raise, like you said that Ukraine did the starting of this war. And then they made it sound like Donald Trump got out there and said Ukraine was totally to blame for the war. That's an exaggeration. But, of course, Trump's statement objectively, in that case, wasn't true. But they decided to make that, oh, this is Trump giving the whole field. He's giving everything to Putin in these negotiations. And so all of these snide comments started getting made by the foreign policy community. And then J.D. Vance, our vice president, started getting into it, and it turned into this kind of pseudo-online political kerfluffle. And I gave the advice, just personally, just here, that I was going to wait, because it sounded like this was every other foreign policy negotiation Trump has ever made, ever. And if we look at the scoreboard, we'll see that when Donald Trump makes some kind of a foreign policy negotiation, he usually ends up getting concessions and something along the lines of what he wants. And I said, I'm going to wait, because there are other people in the Trump administration who are likely to come out and say some things. Now, I regret that I didn't say that last part here on this show. I said that in an interview on I think, Dr. Phil's Merritt Street. And boy, howdy, wouldn't you know it, but Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who, by the way, is not the most MAGA populist member of the Senate. He wasn't in the Senate. He was more of a traditional conservative. He came out in this interview and started laying out the policies and the procedures of why the rhetoric right now between Trump and Zelensky, not to mention the Trump delegation, the American delegation, the Russian delegation in Saudi Arabia, the Ukrainian delegation to not the table in Saudi Arabia, why they're different. And it's a really, really great question. So I think that it's worth your time. I want to make sure we get the clip right. This is clip number 4.
When President Trump posts that President Zelensky is a dictator without elections, what are you thinking?
I think President Trump is very upset at President Zelensky, and in some cases, and rightfully so. Look, number one, Joe Biden had frustrations with Zelensky. People shouldn't forget it. There are newspaper articles out there about how he cursed at him in a phone call because Zelensky, instead of saying thank you for all your help, is immediately out there messaging what we're not doing or what he's not getting. I think the second thing is, frankly, I was personally very upset because...
Hang on. We'll get to that in just a second. I'm gonna cut him off. I'm gonna cut him off like I'm at the Grammys. Hang on a second. I'll let you finish. So Trump is upset in part because the United States, Trump, will have a conversation with Zelensky, and Zelensky will agree to what Trump is saying. And then as soon as Trump hangs up the phone, Zelensky will then run around the world and say, Trump is awful and he's not giving us what we want, and we want this, that, and the other. And Trump, who's a very right to your face kind of guy, is a little pissed. That's understandable. But anyway, Secretary of State Rubio, by all means, also, by the way, pointing out that he did this with Biden as well. And I did go and fact check our dear Secretary of State. And yes, there are news articles reaching all the way back to the beginning of the war, in which Biden was really annoyed that Zelensky would tell him one thing on the phone and then another thing. Man, it seems like Eastern Europeans and Russians are not trustworthy in international politics or something.
What we're not doing or what he's not getting. I think the second thing is, frankly, I was personally very upset because we had a conversation with President Zelensky, the Vice President and I, the three of us, and we discussed this issue about the mineral rights. And we explained to them, look, we want to be in a joint venture with you, not because we're trying to steal from your country, but because we think that's actually a security guarantee. If we're your partner in an important economic endeavor, we get to get paid back some of the money the taxpayers have given, close to $200 billion. And it also, now we have a vested interest in the security of Ukraine. And he said, sure, we want to do this deal. It makes all the sense in the world. The only thing is I need to run it through my legislative process. They have to approve it. I read 2 days later that Zelensky's out there saying, I rejected the deal. I told him, no way, that we're not doing that. Well, that's not what happened in that meeting. So you start to get upset by somebody. We're trying to help these guys. One of the points the president made in his messaging is not that we don't care about Ukraine, but Ukraine is on another continent. It doesn't directly impact the daily lives of Americans. We care about it because it has implications for our allies and ultimately for the world.
So again, just a quick pause to talk a little bit about what Zelensky would do in regard to Secretary of State Rubio in the country. So first, Rubio frames out the idea of the United States gaining mineral rights, which, by the way, now at the time that I'm doing this show, seem a lot more likely, but that Ukraine would share some of the profits of its mineral exports with the United States. And the reason it would share those is because, A, that actually pays the United States back, because Biden just wanted to gift Ukraine the $300 million in money and resources, and Trump wants it paid back because that's the deal Europe has. Europe has paid more than the United States to Ukraine, and Europe also has loaned a lot of that to Ukraine, expecting it to be paid back. Whereas Ukraine, in this particular instance, would benefit by a kind of a longer term payment plan back to the United States through mineral rights. And most importantly, this would give the United States an economic incentive to defend the territorial sovereignty of Ukraine in a way that a simple 1990s nuclear armament treaty would not. If the United States is sharing in the income from a mineral rights deal with Ukraine, then that's going to make actors against the country think twice, because the United States has an economic interest, which, by the way, brings about the further kind of Judeo-Christian westernization, not the Eastern European kind of pseudo-second world nonsense of the Ukrainian people. And that as soon as they had that conversation with the Ukrainian leaders, Zelensky's like, that sounds like a pretty good deal. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, well, kind of an economic stake in Ukraine to guarantee security. I'll take it to the parliament. And what did Zelensky do? He went out saying, no, this is terrible, stupid. They're trying to spell Ukraine away. If you are negotiating with me, and then You stab me in the back the second we walk away from no negotiations, to save face. Yeah, I'm going to be a little salty in front of the international community. And by the way, I say this as a guy who does not like Ukraine. I do not like Russia. I think that Russia was wrong for its invasion of Ukraine. I'm making those three objective points very clear. As I said in the chats yesterday, for me, this is like watching the Steelers play the Patriots. I don't care about either team at all. I don't really like any of them. But in this particular instance, to immediately turn around and look at Rubio and suggest, well, we're in on the deal, and then walk away and say, actually, the deal is terrible and they're trying to manipulate us. Yeah, I can see why that would cause a few tensions. And Rubio goes on in the interview to clarify very clearly that the United States does not want the war to continue, but that it appears, and now we've had enough hints, we'll call them, little helpful Blue's Clues in this situation, to create an idea that what Trump wants, Trump's not directly stated goal, because Trump doesn't state his direct goal. This pisses a lot of people off, because Trump knows that if you state exactly what you want out of the deal, then you're not going to get it. So what it appears the Trump administration is angling for is a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine in which the United States gets some type of a financial promise from Ukraine to start paying back the money that was given to it and the resources, and that Europe would also increase the amount of funding in the defense of Ukraine, likely connected to Poland, and would simultaneously also establish peacekeeping forces in Ukraine itself to keep Russia away. So just like the United States has Ramstein in Germany, Europe would theoretically have a base in Ukraine, which is fine. Now, people who don't like that, that's clearly what they're going for. I'm just saying, if you disagree with that, that's what Trump is clearly angling at. On the flip side, what does Russia get out of the deal? It gets the Donbass and Crimea and some of its territory back that Ukraine took. Probably a slice of the Donbass will be given maybe square mileage for square mileage, just a smidgen, in regard to the exchange of territory. That appears to be what Trump is going for. Now, the problem with that is that's the only good option out there right now. It is. I've looked at this. I despise the conversations about this because everyone either acts like you're some kind of a brave freedom fighter that's defending Ukraine, or you're a puppet of Putin, and you're secretly trying to establish Putin's control over all of Europe. And then the third option in this very jovial conversation among intellects is that actually you're a secret Ukrainian corrupt. You're trying to globalize the world. If you want Ukraine to be sovereign, then you're secretly in bed with Zelensky financially. And none of those options are the case. For the most people in Europe, in the Americas, whose opinions are those I care about at the moment, and by the way, how much I care about Americans' opinions, how much I care about Europeans' opinions. At this moment, it seems as though people are not in any of those three hyperbolic camps. Now, there are some people in those three hyperbolic camps. There's a lot of propaganda out there, absolutely. Most people want the war to be dealt with. They want the war to end. And they want reparations to be made to those who paid. And they want Europe to take a bigger stake in the defense of Europe. Now, to me, that sounds reasonable. Now, I'm sure at this point that the comment section has filled with the brightest of the bright, people saying that Zelensky is some type of a, goose-stepping Nazi dictator and that Putin is wonderful. And then the other side is saying that Putin he's going to exterminate us all, and that everyone who doesn't believe that Russia should be hit with 50,000 missiles at this exact second from the combined forces of the militaries of the world is secretly a Russian puppet mini dictator themselves. Stop it. Stop it. I feel like I get the spray bottle out, like when you're spraying a pet that's barking too loudly. Knock it off. That's why I've suggested that the best possible scenario in this case is to sit back and kind of watch what happens and try not to get into too many social media fistfights along the way. I guarantee you at the end of the day that you're losing sleep over how the negotiations are taking place right now isn't actually going to change all that much in the grand scheme of things. And that's just my hot take on it. That's why I saved this particular one for bonus tonus, is because you may, take everything that I've said here and chuck it out with the bathwater. Totally fine. I hear you. And that's one of the things that Am I going to finish with some emotional speech about that's what makes this country great? No, that's what makes doing this show fun for me. As I really enjoy reading a lot of the takes that get sent in. I enjoy mail time. I like seeing the questions in the comments. It's a fantastic treat to get to broadcast with you. And so that all said, I hope you have a wonderful weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday for more of the same insanity, but half the calories. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated and still first out of 93 WIBC. Take care.